All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see you this autumn morning. It's nice. You get up in the morning, you've got to put on a jacket, right? It's the change of the weather. Of course, my family was just here. Relatives from Michigan were here, and they just went back to Michigan and into a foot of snow. And so we got some pictures of a great-granddaughter building snow castles. Gee, can you imagine that? You know, the sunny weather we've got here. You know, it's 60, 70, 80 degrees. Anyway, grateful for everyone today. Want to continue in a trend that we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. At the end of last month was, of course, Halloween, right? And there's been a theme that we've been exploring these last couple of weeks about our inheritance. The benefit that we receive from the generations that have gone before us, and just having a heart of gratitude to the people that are our benefactors. So, of course, Halloween is the secular version, but actually the holy day is the All Hallows Day, and then All Hallows Eve, Halloween, All Hallows Day, and Day of the Dead, and the All Souls Day, where we recognize and honor and remember our ancestors. And then last week, November 11th, we remembered Veterans Day, and used that as an opportunity also to explore the benefit we've inherited, the blessings that we have. We discussed at every level, from our family, again, our ancestors and our inheritance, and especially our parents, right? The benefit we receive from our parents, but also at the social level, society, the pioneers in society, our elders in our community. At the national level, of course, that's where we honor our veterans, the people who have sacrificed, sometimes even sacrificing their lives for the sake of our nation, for the sake of the country. And then the world level, the saints and sages. So this is the theme that's just this month has been taken over by, because, of course, in just a little over a week, we have Thanksgiving, right? Time to be thankful and grateful for the foundation in America, especially for the Pilgrim Foundation, but also getting together with families and being grateful for our families. And that leads into the Christmas season, which is definitely a very big time to be grateful, right? For the coming of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. So today, I thought I'd explore the Jewish and Christian, particularly the Christian foundation that we inherit. The many blessings that we have because of the sacrifices of the people who went before us. So let me read this from True Parents. The Roman Empire persecuted Christianity severely. Nevertheless, it ended up surrendering in the face of the power of Christians' love for the country that was their enemy. This is how Christianity became a worldwide religion. Christians found the starting point of the path to heaven within the country that was their enemy. And then in another sermon, as Christians witnessed for their faith, wherever they went, they were subjected to persecution and martyrdom. Christianity developed through the bloodshed by its martyrs. That was how Christianity began and how it grew. Actually, the history of missionary activity around the world is quite phenomenal. But if you think about the Christian foundation and the divine principle, we go through and look clearly at all the foundation from the coming of Jesus Christ and the Jewish people not accepting the Messiah, the alternate course that history took. And so for the first 400 years after Jesus, we talk about the persecution of Christians in Rome. And in the Divine Principle, we explore that parallel with the Jewish people's 400 years that they spent in captivity in Egypt and slavery. And it was actually in 392 in the Christian era that Theodosius established Christianity as the state religion. And then we have figures like St. Augustine, which are like the Moses of the Christian era. And then after that, there's establishment there. There's 400 years where Christianity is led in regional. It isn't one unified group. It's all regional leaders in the time of patriarchs, and that corresponds to the Jewish history of the judges. And then in 800 AD, and this corresponds to a similar time in Jewish history, where the Pope proclaims Charlemagne as the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So that's in 800 AD, and that corresponds to Samuel anointing Saul as the king over Israel. And that lasted for 120 years in the biblical record. There was Saul, then David, then Solomon, and then it kind of fell apart. Well, same thing in Christian history, 120 years, and then the Carolingian line kind of got cut off, and then we have the divided East and West Franks, which corresponds in the Old Testament with the north Israel and Judah, the splitting of Israel into two. And then after that 400 years, we have the Babylonian captivity in Jewish history, and in Christian history, we have what Martin Luther calls the Babylonian captivity of the Pope. That's where it's actually a very embarrassing time in Christian history. The popes, lots of popes with lots of kids, celibate popes who are having lots of children. Something's wrong there. At one point we have 3 different popes. At one point, the Pope, gathers the others together and kills them so he can be the Pope. It's a really embarrassing time, actually, in Christian history. But it takes about 210 years, and at the end of this time period, in Jewish history, that's when they come back and reestablish the temple in Jerusalem. And in Christian history, that 210-year period ends with the beginning of the Protestant Reformation and the declaration of Martin Luther of his 95 Theses and the separation. So that next 400 years that leads up to the time that we're living in now, in Christian history, is really a time of amazing missionary activity. Kind of Christianity gets settled. The Catholic Church is sending out Jesuit missionaries, and eventually later on the Protestant churches start sending out missionaries around the world. It's an incredible time of development and expansion, this 400 years, preparing. Even there's a sense of urgency by people. We know that we have to reach all the ends of the earth with Jesus' message before the coming of the Messiah can come. And that was like a Christian expectation and drive for missionary work. And we inherit a lot of this foundation. And especially in America, the United States, we inherit a boatload because we're really the fruit of Christian history. Again, from true parents. Civilization in the North American continent raised the banner of democracy, which was rooted in Christianity. It bequeathed to the world the principles of freedom of religion and respect for equal human rights, as it led the struggle against fascism and communism, which had established atheistic evil sovereignties. So the time that we live in now is the fruit of an incredible Christian foundation. Even the Western civilization, Western culture can't really be separated from the ethics and the values and the principles of the Christian worldview. Last week, I had the opportunity, I kind of stumbled across a book that our daughter Renata has been reading for school. It was called Silence. It's by Shuseiko Endo. He's a Japanese Catholic. And it's a historical novel based on the missionaries in Japan. And I was quite actually reading the story. It's a fictionalized account, but it's describing the reality of Christianity came to Japan around 1550. Francis Xavier was the first Jesuit missionary out in the world. He first went to India, and then he came to Japan. He really fell in love with Japan. And the Christian movement expanded pretty substantially. By 1600, according to the record here, there were over 300,000 Christians in Japan. But at that point, the leaders in Japan decided that it was not a desirable thing, that Christianity was too Western, They didn't want, it was, in opposition with the Buddhists who'd initially been friendly, decided they didn't like it so much. And so then became really serious persecution and to wipe out Christianity. So anyone who was identified as Christian, if they didn't deny their faith by stepping on a picture of Jesus and the Virgin Mary, they were killed. They weren't killed. They were tortured to death. Tortured until either they recanted, and then they were killed, or they were just tortured until they died. So over the next 50 years or so, incredible persecution. And this book basically talks about the struggles and the story of a Jesuit missionary going to Japan, knowing that he's probably going to die, going to be caught and killed, and tortured to death. And, reading about that, it's hard for us to understand the kind of sacrifices that people have made in history. And that was just one example. Christians throughout the world have many times gone and given their lives in order to try to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with the world. And we stand on their foundation. Those kinds of sacrifices. Reading that book just really kind of reminded me that there's so much that's so easy for us to forget and to take for granted. That we're the beneficiaries of an incredible foundation of sacrifice throughout history. And then to add to that, this last week I got an email announcing that the special event that's happening at the Basilica in Washington, D.C. It's called a Night of Witness. It's going to happen next Saturday. And it'll be broadcast online too. But it's going to be, a Catholic worship service sponsored by this organization that the lead for that is actually the Pope. It's called Aid to the Church in Need. Here's the flyer for it. It's a Vespers for today's Christian martyrs. So it says, please join us for a night of prayer and deep reflection as we give witness to today's Christian martyrs and our brothers and sisters still suffering for the faith around the world. Of course, just after reading this book about the missionaries in Japan, I'm thinking, wow, this really hit home again. How God has really worked so desperately through people who, because of their faith, were willing to give everything for the sake of God and God's providence. At this event, there'll be a nun who's a teacher and counselor in Pakistan, who in Pakistan Christians are openly persecuted. And there's a Franciscan from Sri Lanka who's going to talk, and also there's a priest from the Philippines whose cathedral was bombed just earlier this year. So here's some of the information that they shared on their website about Christian persecution today. It says that 300 million Christians around the world are suffering from persecution. And if you look at Christians around the world, 1 out of every 7 Christians in the world live in a country where they suffer some form of persecution. And it isn't going down, it's actually increasing. In 2004, there were 108 countries identified, and by 2017, there's 143 countries. And some of them, 38, it's very severe persecution. And they say at least 75% of all religiously motivated violence and oppression is targeted on Christians. That's something that you don't hear in the news. You hear, the Jewish minority or Muslim persecution, but to realize that 75% around the world is Christians who are being persecuted the most. And in spite of this persecution and this around the world, it's amazing to reflect on, and I think important for us to reflect on how much the world has benefited from Christianity. It's easy to point out the mistakes, and we know that missionary was a lot involved with colonialism and the abuse of native peoples, and there's that. But the truth is the benefit we have from Western civilization comes on a foundation of not just Christian, Jewish and Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview and beliefs. So I just want to just touch on a couple of them that we can be grateful for and to honor, that we inherit this worldview, this Christian worldview that makes for a safe world, the kind of blessings that we have in the world, because of the sacrifices that people have made in history and people continue to make today. So the first is just God. The emphasis on God as the absolute, but this idea of absolute values, that there is right and wrong, that morals are based not on just human philosophy or human thought, but they're based on an absolute standard. Now, and today we hear a lot of people, no, it's all relative. Your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth, and this kind of wishy-washiness. But Christianity, in order to build a successful society, you need a core root of values, universally shared values, that are honored and held as absolute. And Christianity, by promoting this kind of value and culture, laid a foundation for a society that could actually work. Without morals and ethics, all the laws you want will not create a healthy, happy society. And we see this breaking away from morals based on ethics. No, what feels good, right? This kind of philosophy is really scary and actually dangerous for our healthy society and our world. And a second part of that worldview, Christian worldview, that the world is benefiting from is that this belief that all human life is sacred. And this especially, it hasn't always been practiced, but it's fundamental in Christian worldview, the value of all people. So the king and the slave are both equal in God's sight. That human beings are not just animals, they're not just smart animals, that actually we have divine value. There's something holy and special about human beings. And therefore, movements like anti-slavery, without the Christian worldview, we would still have slavery today. It was Christians, and even the Pope way back was saying that it was wrong, even while people were still practicing it. But it was Christians that led the movement to end slavery because of this worldview that all life is sacred. And the idea about equality, the democracy, comes from the feeling that all people have value. Whereas in some cultures, even the untouchables in India, or the slaves or serfs, whatever, somehow had less value than the upper crust of society. But this is not a Christian concept. In fact, it goes in the opposite of Christian teachings. And this is the foundation for the kind of world we have now, where people are opposed to slavery. And where people emphasize that all human life is sacred. So then a third point is that the Christian worldview emphasizes that God is a God of order and meaning. And honestly speaking, this is the basis for science and technology. Is even believing that we live in an orderly universe that you can make sense of. Because prior to that, most of the thinking was that, the universe is just all chaos. And the gods just kind of do what they want to do whenever they feel like doing it. And you never know when up is going to be down. And that was the world before. People they couldn't understand. But because of the Judeo-Christian worldview, that God is a God of order, that we can come to understand how things work. We can figure it out. In fact, God puts on us the responsibility to be lords over creation. So we have to learn about nature. We have to learn about things. So because there's order and meaning in life, also it means that all life has significance. Again, coming back to all human life is sacred, that our lives have meaning. That our lives are meaningful and purposeful. This worldview changes so much and lays the foundation for a world where we can see people actually striving to accomplish their goals, their purpose, their calling. We can see that kind of world because this worldview stimulates us to understand and explore the world. Most scientists came from the religious realm. Science developed from the monasteries and the scholarly people in the religious tradition. So even though a lot of people will say, yeah, religion and science are enemies, no. God is the greatest scientist. And we're encouraged, especially in the Christian worldview, to explore that. And then there's the other side of the coin. Christianity points out, contrary to a lot of the New Age thinking, that we all have to deal with the problem of sin. That we're not born innocent and somehow life corrupts us. No, we're born in sin. And we have to do things. We have to make action in our lives to grow ourselves, to perfect our character. This is why self-discipline and self-control is so important in our life. That we have to grow ourselves. And we have to fight to overcome sin. Not just, oh yeah, this is a bad thing. Well, maybe it's not such a bad thing. I'm just going to accept that as the way it is. So by addressing the problem of sin, then even Western society looks at, okay, how we need to pay attention that people tend to be greedy, people tend to be selfish, and we need to design our society and our structure and government structure. This is a particularly amazing thing about the American government structure with the checks and balances, to control for that. Because we have to pay attention to the problem of sin and deal with that in our lives. But probably the most important from the Christian worldview, and I think and the most powerful, has been the idea that God is a God of love and the importance of God's forgiveness and healing power in our lives. Love is the ultimate healing power. The martyrs and the saints of history, they loved unconditionally. They loved even to the extent of giving their lives for the sake of the people they were reaching out to. Sacrificing everything. And this idea that forgiveness is God's design, not revenge. So much of the world, and especially so much of history, has been built about revenge. You know, when someone does me wrong, then it's my duty to pay them back and add some extra. Right? This worldview that forgiveness is really the key, it changes everything. It brings the real hope for our lives. And also, in terms of being able to transform individual people's lives, the experience of God who loves me unconditionally, accepts me, is even in spite of all my shortcomings, God is the loving Heavenly Parent, Heavenly Father, that cares for me and wants only good for me. This isn't the God that doesn't care what we do. Oh, you're going to do all those evil things. Okay, go ahead. I don't care. I love you anyway. I don't really care. No. The God that pains and suffers when we do evil and does everything to create our lives and to guide us so that we can be fulfilled, that we can do good. But God is always there, anxious to forgive us and help us and guide us to turn away from sin. Not just accept our sin, but love us in spite of our sin, and always, always working in our lives, through the people in our lives, through the environments, through the circumstance, to bring us to healing. Because that's what God does. This is God's loving parental heart. This is the Christian foundation that we've inherited. This is the basis for a healthy society, especially in Western civilization. A lot of these things are being thrown out the window. You know, it's like, oh no, we don't need that. You know, morals are relative. What's right and wrong is up to me. You know, all human life is kind of sacred, but, you know, if they're not born or they're from a different culture or, you know, they have less money, you know, we feel that they're less valuable. The significance of science and in order and logic. I mean, sometimes now I hear debates and there's not even logic anymore. It's just emotion. Without even thinking about God designed the universe in an amazing, beautiful way for us to explore. And recognizing that we have to deal in our lives with the problem of sin and evil. There's something we have to address. We can't just ignore it and pretend it's all okay. And underneath all that, the bottom line, understanding that God is a God of absolute love, forgiveness, and healing. The only thing that I would add to this, and this is especially the emphasis that our two parents have brought to us, is that to remind us the importance of the family. Because Jesus couldn't establish a family in his lifetime, and Christianity really was the worldview was about individual salvation. And God's hope has always been that we would create God-centered families, and that God could dwell not just in us as individuals, but us as a family. And so this is actually the providential work that true parents, that Jesus called true parents to do in this time in history. Is to build on this foundation, this precious foundation that we all inherit, and expand it to a consciousness of that the family is God's dwelling place. Not just me as an individual, but my whole family. So let me close with these from our true parents. This is actually from the Divine Principle. The merit of the age has increased in proportion to the foundation of heart laid by the prophets, sages, and righteous people who came before us. I read this last week. The merit of the age, the benefit that we have in this time in history, is related to all the sacrifices of the people who went before us. So it's so important in our life that we honor and remember the many people that have gone before us, from our family level, our own parents, our ancestry, our society level, our elders, the people in the world, the veterans, the people in our nation who sacrificed for us as a country for freedom, gave their lives, many people, and the martyrs and saints of history who sacrificed everything for the sake of God and for the sake of God's will being done in this world, for the sake of God's providence. So let's always remember these benefactors. Finally, again, from true parents. Each one of you needs to know clearly that you sprang from past ages and that you are called to build the future. Also, countless saints and sages shed their blood to bring you to where you are today. And they are working even now, behind the scene, hoping you will increasingly develop this consciousness. This is our inheritance. Let's also be people who pass on a good inheritance to the next generation and to the future. Please join me in prayer. Good morning, Father, Mother God, our loving Heavenly Parent. We are so grateful for the ways that you're working in our lives today, but especially today we want to remember and honor the sacrifices of your precious sons and daughters who throughout history have given their everything to attend you, given their whole lives for the sake of your providence of healing and restoration, longing to see one more brother or sister, your children, brought to know your love, to know your precious truth, to experience your healing love and healing power. Heavenly Parent, the world today is even in more scary circumstances. And yet, in our perspective, sometimes it seems overwhelming. But we stand on a foundation of people who sacrifice so much more than we can even comprehend, Heavenly Parent. And we're so grateful for that. And with confidence, Heavenly Parent, we want to be the sons and daughters that you can count on, the sons and daughters that you can work through to multiply your goodness, your blessing, your healing in the world, especially in the people, in the lives of the people that we interact with. Heavenly Parent, we're so sorry that many times we forget the many blessings that we have and the benefits that we have because of the sacrifices of those who went before us. But we determine today, each one of us as we come before you in our reflection, want to express our gratitude to you, to all those who came before us, and also our determination, Heavenly Parent, to be the sons and daughters that can bring joy to you, bring healing to the world, and be a blessing to those we interact with. Heavenly Parent, we thank you and offer ourselves again to you together as your sons and daughters and as blessed central families. Amen and amen.